The small colony on Tarsa 9 had always been a beacon of hope. Far from Earth, it was a place where humanity's dream of expanding into the stars felt real. Towering glass structures shimmered in the light of the twin suns, and fields of alien crops stretched for miles, ready to be harvested. Scientists, engineers, and families all called it home, living and working together in harmony, a testament to human determination. But that was before the attack. It came without warning. One minute the colony was peaceful, alive with the hum of daily activity. The next, the skies above erupted with explosions. Alien ships, sleek and menacing, blotted out the sun, their weapons tearing through the atmosphere with terrifying force. There was no time to prepare, no time to escape. Commander Julia Harris, known as Jules to her friends, had been in the middle of a briefing when the first explosion hit. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Her heart pounded as the blaring alarms screamed throughout the base. "Enemy ships detected," the comms officer shouted, voice trembling. Jules stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. "Get to the shelters, now," she ordered, her voice sharp with authority. She wasn't afraid, not yet, but she knew the danger was real. The first wave of Salran forces had arrived, an alien species no one had ever truly understood despite years of contact. Their ships were silent, their technology advanced beyond anything humanity had ever seen. And the worst part, they didn't just invade with guns and bombs. They came with weapons that tore at the very heart of human biology, poisons, toxins, diseases. They didn't need to conquer through firepower. They could wipe out entire populations with a single breath. Jules's mind raced as she raced through the corridors, directing people to safety, her boots echoing loudly in the chaos. But with every step, she felt the cold weight of fear sinking deeper into her chest. She couldn't afford to let panic take hold, but it was hard to ignore the reality. By the time she reached the medbay, it was already too late. The air smelled faintly of burning metal and something else, something sharp, bitter. And then she saw it. Her people, her friends, her comrades, all writhing in pain, unable to breathe as their bodies began to shut down. She barely stopped to process the scene, her heart heavy with dread. She'd known this could happen, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of her people falling to their knees, gasping for air, their skin turning an unnatural shade of purple. It was like a nightmare come alive. Dr. Zill, the head medic, was at the center of the room, his face pale with fear. He was trying to help as many people as he could, but there weren't enough hands, not enough supplies. "Commander," he called, spotting her in the doorway. "We need." "I know," Jules said, cutting him off. "We need to get them to the shelters now." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was pointless. There was no shelter from this. The virus, the toxin, was already spreading through the colony like wildfire. She could see it in their eyes, the same vacant, empty stare that marked the beginning of the end. Jules grabbed Dr. Zill by the shoulder, her grip tight, her mind working desperately. "What's the plan? We have to do something." We don't know what to do," Dr. Zill admitted, his voice a whisper. He looked around at the suffering, his hands shaking. "The Salrans, they have a weapon, a virus, a toxin that attacks the immune system. We've never seen anything like it. By the time we know what's happening, it's too late." Jules swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. They were fighting something they couldn't even understand. The Salran strategy had always been to attack without warning, to overwhelm their enemies before they could react. And now it was working. A scream cut through the air, raw and guttural. Jules turned, her stomach dropping as a young soldier collapsed to the floor, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with fear. The virus had taken him. Jules wanted to run to him, to do something, anything, but her feet were frozen to the floor. She could feel the fear creeping into her own chest now, tightening around her heart. "This isn't over," she said, forcing the words out through a throat that felt suddenly dry. "We'll find a way, we have to." Dr. Zill nodded, though his eyes betrayed his doubt. "There's only one option left, Commander. We've been working on a cure, but it's still in the trial stages. We don't know if it will work. We don't even know if it will save you." Jules stared at him for a long moment. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one she had. "Then we'll try. I'll do whatever it takes." And with that, she stepped forward, bracing herself for whatever came next. She wasn't going to die like this. Not today, not on her watch. Jules had led her people through worse, and she was going to get them through this too, whatever it took. But deep down, as she followed Dr. Zill to the lab, one thought burned in her mind. How could humanity defeat an enemy that didn't just destroy, but killed from the inside out. The lab was quiet, too quiet, considering the storm outside. The only sound was the faint hum of machines and the rapid footsteps of Dr. Zill as he moved around the room, gathering equipment. His face was pale, his movements frantic. Jules stood by the door, trying to focus on the task ahead, but her body was growing heavier with each passing minute. She could feel the virus coursing through her veins, cold and unforgiving. It wasn't like anything she'd ever experienced before. It wasn't just a sickness. It was an invasion, a slow death that made her feel less human with every breath she took. Her limbs were already starting to feel numb, her head clouded with fever. "Doc," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are you sure this will work?" Dr. Zill didn't answer immediately. He was too busy, his eyes darting between vials of glowing liquids and the various medical readouts flashing across the monitors. He had to keep going. There was no other choice. "Trust me," he said, though his words lacked the confidence she'd hoped for. "This is all we have. If it works, it'll reverse the virus. If not—" He trailed off, but the unspoken "we're dead" hung heavily in the air. Jules nodded, biting back a cough. She had no choice but to trust him. There was no backup plan, no escape route. The colony was dying, and they were the only ones left who might be able to stop it. If they failed, humanity's first foothold on Tarsa 9 would be lost. "All right," she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "Let's do this." Dr. Zill quickly prepared the syringe, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't sure whether it was from the pressure or his own fear. "This is experimental," he warned again, his eyes meeting hers. "We don't know what will happen. There could be side effects." Jules cut him off. "I've heard that before," she said with a strained smile. "Just do it." Without waiting for another word, Dr. Zill plunged the needle into her arm. The cool liquid flowed into her bloodstream, and for a moment nothing happened. She felt nothing but the soft burn of the needle's entry. But then the sensation hit. It wasn't like any medicine she'd ever taken. There was a heat, a sudden sharp pain that spread from her arm, searing through her chest and into her head. Her body arched involuntarily as her senses went haywire. It felt like fire and ice at the same time, a pressure building behind her eyes, her throat closing up, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Jules," Dr. Zill's voice was distant, filled with concern. "Are you okay?" She tried to answer, but her throat felt like it was closing, suffocating her. Her head spun, her vision blurred. I caw." Her voice faltered as a wave of nausea crashed over her. She gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. The pain was unbearable. It was as though the virus and the antidote were fighting inside her, waging a war that she couldn't control. Her muscles spasmed, and she fell to her knees, gasping for air. Her body shook violently, but she couldn't tell if it was the toxin or the cure. Dr. Zill rushed to her side, his face full of panic. "Jules, hold on, it's supposed to be working." Jules could barely hear him. Everything was fatting, her mind clouded with the confusion of it all. She wanted to tell him she was fine, that it was working, but the words wouldn't come. She closed her eyes, leaning against the cold metal of the lab floor. Then something in her snapped. Her eyes shot open. The fog cleared for just a moment, and in that brief instant she saw the truth. She wasn't just going to lie there. She wasn't going to die like this. Her hands clenched into fists. The feeling of helplessness that had threatened to overwhelm her was gone. In its place was a burning fury, the same fire that had always driven her to fight. She wasn't going to let the Salrans win. Not now, not ever. "Jules," Dr. Zill's voice cracked, and his hand rested on her shoulder. "Are you?" "I'm fine," she managed to say, pushing herself to her feet. Her voice was weak, but there was something new in it now, something fierce. "I'm going to make it." Dr. Zill's eyes widened in disbelief. He could see the change in her. The toxin was still in her, but the antidote, it was doing something. Her movements were sharper now, her body coming alive with energy, though it was clear that it was fighting against itself. But she was standing. She wasn't giving up. "You don't look fine," Dr. Zill said softly, his voice laced with worry. Jules looked at him, forcing a smile. "I'll be all right, but we need to move fast. The Salrans won't wait for us to recover." Without another word, she turned toward the door, her boots clicking against the floor with every step. Her legs were unsteady, her head still swimming, but her mind was clear. There was no time to waste. "I've got a plan," she said, her voice low but steady. "We go straight to their command center. If we can take them out, we might have a chance of turning this around." Dr. Zill hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He didn't fully understand what was happening to her, but he could see the determination in her eyes. If there was any hope of saving the colony, it would come from this woman, this human, who refused to be broken. Jules glanced over her shoulder as she reached the door, the weight of the world on her shoulders, but a fire burning in her chest. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice steady. And with that, she stepped into the hallway, ready to face whatever came next. Jules moved through the abandoned hallways of the colony with a determination that surprised even her. Every step felt like an effort. Her body was still rebelling against the poison coursing through her veins, and the antidote was far from a miracle cure. But she was still on her feet, and that was enough. For now. Behind her, Dr. Zill followed, his footsteps slow and unsure, his eyes constantly flicking between her and the path ahead. He had always been the cautious one, the one who checked and double-checked, who ran tests and verified results. But right now, there was no room for caution. There was no time for anything but action. "We're almost there," Jules said, her voice hoarse but firm. She wasn't sure who she was trying to convince, the doctor or herself, but it didn't matter. They had a job to do, and failure wasn't an option, not while so many lives were at stake. The colony's command center loomed ahead, a massive structure of sleek metal and glass. From the outside, it looked like a symbol of strength, something the Saurons would need to break if they were to take control of the colony. Jules could already see their forces gathered at the entrance, dark silhouettes standing like statues against the glowing backdrop of Tarsa 9 twin moons. The Saurons had arrived. "Stay low," she whispered, signaling for Dr. Zill to follow her into a nearby maintenance shaft. The plan was simple: infiltrate the command center, locate the Sauron leader, and neutralize the threat. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Inside the shaft, Jules's breath was shallow. Every inhale felt like a battle, her lungs aching, her body rebelling. The virus was still there, lingering just beneath the surface. The antidote had given her a spark of life, but the fire inside her was dangerously close to burning out. She had no idea how much longer she could keep this up, but she wouldn't stop until she had no other choice. Dr. Zill's voice broke the silence. "Jules, are you sure about this? The Saurons, they're brutal. We don't know how many are inside. It's suicide." Jules gave him a grim smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "We don't have a choice, Doc. If we don't stop them now, they'll wipe us out, all of us. We can't let that happen." She could feel his hesitation, but it didn't matter. He was with her, and that was enough. They crept through the maintenance shafts, barely making a sound. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and fear. As they neared the command center, Jules's mind raced. The Death Apple toxin was still working inside her, pushing her body to its limits. She was running on fumes, but there was no turning back now. They reached a vent near the center of the building, peering through the grate to survey the room below. What they saw made Jules's heart sink. The Sauron leader stood at the front, a tall, imposing figure who exuded an air of authority. His skin was a dark, glossy purple, and his eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural light. His soldiers surrounded him, moving in perfect synchrony, their weapons ready. But it wasn't just the Sauron leader that made Jules's blood run cold. It was the object in his hands. A glowing, spherical fruit, its skin a deep red with veins of black running through it. The Death Apple. Jules had heard of it, but never thought she would see it in person. The Saurons had created the fruit as a weapon, a biochemical weapon capable of wiping out entire populations with its toxins. No cure, no warning. The Death Apple wasn't just deadly, it was final. One bite, and the virus inside would spread faster than any human body could handle. There would be no time to react, no time to fight back. Her stomach churned as she watched the Sauron leader raise the fruit to his lips, a twisted smile playing across his face. He didn't just want to conquer humanity, he wanted to destroy it, completely and utterly. The Death Apple was their way of making sure humanity would never recover. "Doc," Jules whispered, her voice a low growl, "we can't let him use that fruit. We can't let him eat it." Dr. Zill looked at her, his face pale. "You want to stop him? We're outnumbered. We don't have time to think," she snapped, cutting him off. "He eats that fruit and it's over. We take him down now or we all die." Jules didn't wait for an answer. She slid the grate open with a soft click, carefully dropping down into the room below. Her legs buckled when she landed, her body protesting, but she forced herself up, clutching her weapon tightly. She had to keep moving. There was no time for weakness. She barely registered Dr. Zill's quiet footsteps behind her. The two of them made their way through the room, using the shadows to conceal their approach. The Salrans were still focused on the leader, none of them noticing the intruders. Jules's heart pounded in her chest as they neared the Salran leader. The Death Apple was close now, so close. She could feel the tension in the air, a thick, heavy pressure. This was it. If they didn't act now, all was lost. "Now, Doc," she hissed. With a swift motion, Jules sprang from the shadows, raising her rifle. The blast rang out, hitting the nearest Salran soldier in the chest. The creature collapsed with a sickening thud. Chaos erupted. The remaining Salrans turned toward them, weapons drawn, their eyes wide with surprise. The Salran leader's eyes locked onto Jules, fury flashing across his face as he raised the Death Apple to his mouth. "No," Jules screamed. She sprinted forward, desperate, her body screaming in protest, but she was determined. She wouldn't let the Death Apple destroy them. Not today, not while she still had a breath left in her body. But just as she reached him, the Salran leader grinned, his teeth sharp and wicked. And then he bit into the Death Apple. Jules watched in horror as the Salran leader sank his teeth into the glowing red fruit, his sharp teeth piercing its skin with a sickening crunch. The fruit's pulsing energy seemed to hum in the air as the leader's eyes flashed with triumph. A dark cloud of poison began to seep from the wound, curling like smoke into the air around him. "No," Jules screamed, her voice filled with desperation. She didn't even think. Her body moved on instinct. She sprinted forward, ignoring the sharp pain in her limbs, the ache in her chest, the burning in her veins. All that mattered was stopping the leader before it was too late. The Salran leader's smile only grew wider. His eyes locked onto Jules as he raised the Death Apple to his lips, ready to finish what he had started. "You're too late," he sneered, his voice cold and mocking. "You cannot stop what has already begun. This world is mine now." The air seemed to grow heavier, the poison spreading, creeping toward Jules like an invisible tide. She could feel the weight of it, the overwhelming sense that she was out of time. It was now or never. In one swift motion, Jules pulled her gun and aimed it at the leader. "Not today," she growled. The world seemed to slow down as she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out with a sharp crack, the bullet flying toward the leader's chest. But the leader was fast. He twisted, his alien reflexes far quicker than anything Jules could anticipate. The shot missed, grazing his side as he ducked behind a nearby column. But the Death Apple, it was still in his hand, and that was all Jules cared about. She couldn't let him finish it. She couldn't let that poison escape into the air. Not with so many people still alive in the colony. If that fruit's toxins were released, everyone would die. She heard Dr. Zill's voice behind her shouting, urging her to get back. But Jules didn't listen. She couldn't. The Salran leader took another step, eyes blazing with rage, his body trembling as the fruit's poison began to take its toll. He was losing control, his breath shallow and erratic, his once imposing stature faltering. It was clear the fruit was starting to affect him too. But he still had one final weapon, the poison inside the Death Apple. Jules wasn't going to give him the chance to use it. "Get down," she shouted to Dr. Zill, diving toward the leader as he raised the fruit again, his hands shaking with feverish anticipation. With every ounce of strength she had left, she tackled him, her body crashing into his as she knocked the fruit from his hands. The Death Apple rolled across the floor, just out of reach, its ominous glow casting a sickly light on the walls. But the Salran leader wasn't done. He was stronger than she had expected, his alien muscles far more powerful than anything her human body could handle. He shoved her off with one swift motion, sending her crashing into a nearby wall. Pain exploded in her side as she hit the ground, her vision blurring. The virus in her body was still raging, and now the leader's strength made everything worse. She could feel herself slipping, the world around her fading. But she refused to give in. She pushed herself to her feet, gritting her teeth as she fought through the dizziness. "Not like this," she whispered to herself. "Not today." She could see Dr. Zill scrambling to grab the Death Apple, his hands shaking as he reached for the deadly fruit. The leader was almost on top of him now, the poison making him desperate, his movements erratic. It wasn't enough to just stop him anymore. Jules needed to finish this. She charged forward again, adrenaline pushing her forward despite the exhaustion in her bones. The leader turned toward her, fury flashing in his eyes. He reached out to strike, but this time she was ready. With a roar, Jules tackled him again, this time landing directly on top of him, her hands grasping for anything she could use. She wasn't going to stop until he was finished. The death apple was inches away now. She could see it, hear the faint buzzing of its toxic energy. Time was running out. With everything she had left, Jules slammed her fist into the leader's face. The blow landed with a sickening crunch, knocking him back, his grip loosening around her throat. He gasped for air, his face contorting in agony as the poison inside him spread, his strength fatting. "Die, you monster," Jules whispered, her voice fierce. With a final push, she reached for the death apple. Her fingers wrapped around the fruit, its skin cold and pulsing. She felt a surge of relief. The battle wasn't over yet. But then, just as she was about to crush the fruit beneath her fist, the Sauron leader's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with inhuman strength. His eyes were wild with pain and anger, but there was also something else, fear, real fear. Jules could see it in his eyes. The fruit was killing him too. "You think you've won?" The leader spat, his voice low and guttural. "You think you can stop us? We are invincible." Jules didn't even flinch. She pulled back, using her remaining strength to slam her elbow into his chest, knocking the air out of him. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "I do." And with one final twist of her wrist, she crushed the death apple, the fruit exploding with a bright, toxic light. The poison inside it burst out, swirling in a deadly cloud, but the impact sent shockwaves through the room. The Sauron leader gasped, his body convulsing as the effects of his own weapon took hold. In that moment, everything seemed to go still. The leader's body went limp, his grip on Jules fatting as he collapsed to the floor. Jules stood over him, breathing heavily, her heart pounding. Her vision was hazy, but the weight of what she had just done settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had stopped him. And the colony had a chance to survive. But there was no time to rest, not yet. Jules looked up at Dr. Zill, who was still recovering from the chaos. They had won, but the fight wasn't over. There were still Sauron forces outside, still dangers to face. But for now, in this moment, they had won. And that was enough. Jules stood over the fallen Sauron leader, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Her body was a battlefield, her every breath a struggle as the virus and the antidote warred within her. The room was eerily silent now, save for the faint hum of the lights above and the distant sounds of the ongoing chaos outside. The death apple was gone, destroyed, but the battle was far from over. She wiped a thin sheen of sweat from her forehead, her body trembling with every movement. Her limbs felt heavy, as if they weren't her own. Her vision flickered, blurring for a moment before snapping back into focus. She had only moments before the toxin in her system completely overwhelmed her, but she couldn't let it end here, not like this. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for Dr. Zill. She found him near the entrance, his face pale, sweat beading on his brow as he worked quickly, pulling out medical supplies and attaching them to the makeshift IV he had managed to assemble. The antidote had worked, sort of, but she was far from stable. Every second counted now. "Doc," she called out, her voice hoarse but firm. Dr. Zill looked up, relief flashing in his eyes. "Jules, you—" His voice caught in his throat as he saw the bloodshot determination in her eyes. "You did it." She nodded, but her words were barely a whisper. "It's not over. We've still got a long way to go." He rushed to her side, his hands gently supporting her as she swayed on her feet. "I can help. You just need to rest for a minute." But Jules shook her head, her mind focused on something else. "The others? We need to check on the rest of the colony. We can't just wait here. The Saurons are still out there." Dr. Zill hesitated. "Jules, you're not in any shape, too." "I'm fine," she cut him off. She wasn't fine, not by any means. But she would be damned if she let her people fall just because she couldn't stand up anymore. She took a step forward, her legs wobbling beneath her, but she steadied herself. Her will was stronger than the pain. "Jules," Dr. Zill began again, but he knew better than to argue with her. She was already pushing him aside, moving toward the door. The corridor outside was still dark, lit only by the flickering emergency lights. The air smelled of smoke and chemicals, a reminder of the fight they had barely survived. They were alive, but the cost had been high, and the fight wasn't over. "Stay close," Jules said, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried authority. She knew she was the one in charge now, even if her body was betraying her. They moved quickly, slipping through the shattered hallways, their footsteps silent. Jules's mind raced as they neared the central control room. The Sauron forces had been methodical in their attack, and she knew that even though their leader was dead, the rest of their forces would be regrouping. The colony wasn't safe yet. "We need to make sure there's no one left," she said, her voice low, eyes scanning the dimly lit halls for any signs of movement. "And if there are survivors, we need to get them out." Dr. Zill nodded, his face a mask of concentration. He could see the toll the battle had taken on her, but there was no stopping Jules now. He admired her for it, even though he feared what would happen if she kept pushing herself this way. As they reached the control room, Jules signaled for him to stay back. She crept forward, her hand on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the command center. It was eerily quiet, the once bustling hub of activity now a ghostly shell. The screens flickered with static, and the sound of distant explosions echoed in the distance. Jules took a deep breath and stepped inside, her weapon raised. "Clear," she whispered, scanning the room one last time. The Saurons were gone, but there was no telling how many had escaped. The rest of the colony was still vulnerable. She had to act fast. She turned to Dr. Zill. "We need to get the comms back online. I need to send a signal." Dr. Zill was already at the console, his hands flying over the keys. "I can do that," he said, his voice steady but strained. "But you need to rest. I'll send the signal, but you can't keep going like this." Jules wanted to argue, but she didn't have the energy. She watched as he worked, her eyes half closed. The exhaustion was pulling at her, but she forced herself to stay awake. She couldn't afford to give in. Not now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Zill turned to her. "Signal sent," he said, a slight tremor in his voice. "We've contacted the nearest fleet. Help is on the way." Jules closed her eyes in relief, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. "Good, we did it. We held them off." Dr. Zill smiled back, though it was a weary, strained smile. "We did it together." But Jules knew that the fight wasn't over. Not really. The Saurons had shown no mercy, and there was always the possibility that they would return. But for now, they had won. They had survived, and that in itself was a victory. Jules turned to face him, her body aching with every movement, but her spirit unbroken. "We can rest when the job's done. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Dr. Zill nodded, though he looked at her with a deep, unspoken concern. He wanted to argue, but he knew better. Jules wasn't the type to stop until the job was done. Together, they made their way toward the medbay, the hum of the lights above their only companion. The battle for Tarsa 9 wasn't over. But with the fleet on its way, and with the courage of the humans still burning strong, Jules knew they had a chance. They had won, and they would do whatever it took to keep it that way. The sound of distant explosions still rumbled through the corridors, a grim reminder that the fight was far from over. The flames that had once ravaged the colony's outer walls were slowly dying down, but the damage was done. The Saurons had come, and they had left their mark. Jules's legs wobbled beneath her as she moved through the halls, the world spinning slightly with every step. Her body was betraying her, each movement a painful reminder of how much she had endured. She had fought, had won, but at a cost. The virus was still inside her, the antidote's effects fading. She was running on fumes now, every breath a battle, her heart racing faster than it should. But there was no time for rest, no time to stop. She couldn't afford it, not when there were still people depending on her. Dr. Zill had insisted that she rest, that she lie down, that they get her the treatment she needed. But Jules wasn't the type to wait for someone else to fix things. She had already seen too many fall, too many people lost to the Saurons' relentless attack. She wouldn't be another casualty. They passed through the corridors together, the remnants of the colony's bright future now smudged with smoke and dust. Dr. Zill was silent beside her, watching her closely. His face was tired, but it was filled with quiet determination. He had seen what Jules was capable of, and he knew that if anyone could lead them through this, it was her. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said softly, his voice full of concern. "You need to rest, Jules. You can't keep going like this." Jules gave him a half-smile, though it barely reached her eyes. "Rest is for the weak," she replied, her voice rough. "And I'm not weak." "You're human," Dr. Zill reminded her, "and even the strongest humans need to rest." Jules didn't respond. She couldn't afford to stop now. Not with the comms still down, not with the Sauron forces scattered across the planet. There was still a war to fight, and she wasn't going to let her people fall because of her own weakness. As they reached the colony's central command, the door slid open with a soft hiss. The control room was dark, lit only by the flickering screens that once displayed data vital to the colony's survival. Now those same screens showed nothing but static and warning signs. The system was damaged, corrupted by the Sauron's attack. It was a miracle it was still standing. "Are there any survivors?" Jules asked, her voice quiet but firm. Dr. Zill paused, his eyes scanning the empty room. "A few," he said, his tone heavy with the weight of the losses they'd already suffered. "Not many. Most are either dead or too far gone to save." Jules nodded, her heart sinking. She had feared this. It wasn't just the Sauron's soldiers that had taken a toll. It was the fear, the panic, the helplessness that spread through the colony like wildfire. People had fought, but it hadn't been enough. But there were still some left. There was still hope. "We can still do something," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We'll rebuild, we'll fight back, we're not done yet." Dr. Zill looked at her, his expression a mix of admiration and worry. "You're right, but first we need to make sure the Sauron's don't come back." Jules's gaze sharpened. "We need to find their command center, destroy whatever's left of their forces and get the comms back online. That's the only way we'll survive this." Dr. Zill's hands trembled slightly as he worked at the console, trying to access the systems that were still barely functional. He worked quickly, but there was no mistaking the stress on his face. Jules could see the fear in his eyes, but there was something else too, a fierce determination. He had seen his people suffer, seen the pain and loss, but he wasn't giving up. Not yet. The console beeped. A map of the colony flashed on the screen, showing the location of the remaining Sauron forces scattered across the planet. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "There," Dr. Zill said, pointing to the map. "Their main base is still active. If we can get to that, we might be able to take them down for good." Jules's eyes locked onto the location he indicated. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. The Sauron's were powerful, ruthless. But they had one thing the Sauron's, each other. The strength of the human will, the will to survive. "We don't have much time," Jules said, her voice low, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "We hit them now, we take the fight to them." Dr. Zill hesitated for a moment before nodding. He knew the risks. He knew that pushing forward was dangerous, but it was the only choice they had. "Let's do it," he said quietly. The door to the command center slid open again, and they stepped out into the darkened hallways, moving with purpose. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavy on them both, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when the colony's future was hanging by a thread. They made their way toward the main exit, where the remains of the colony's defenses had once stood. There were only a few soldiers left, many of them wounded, but they were still alive. They still had their fight in them. Jules stopped in front of them, her voice steady, though her body was shaking with exhaustion. "We're not done yet," she said, her words strong, unwavering. "The Sauron's are still out there, but we're going to take them down, together. We're going to rebuild, we're going to survive." The soldiers nodded, their faces hard with determination. The fire in their eyes matched Jules's. They had lost so much, but they weren't going to lose everything. Not yet. Jules looked up at Dr. Zill, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. "We're going to finish this," she said, her voice fierce. "And we're going to win." Dr. Zill met her gaze, his face grim but filled with resolve. "We will, for humanity." And with that, they moved forward into the heart of the colony, ready to face whatever came next. They had lost much, but they still had each other, and that was enough to keep fighting. The colony was broken. The once vibrant city, with its gleaming structures and peaceful streets, now lay in ruins, a shadow of what it had been. Smoke rose from the wreckage, and the air smelled of burning metal and ash. The walls that had once protected them were now scarred by the Sauron's deadly assault. But the human spirit hadn't been broken, not yet. Jules, with Dr. Zill by her side, led the group of survivors through the crumbling streets. They had no more time to mourn the loss of their homes, their families, or the comrades they had lost. The fight wasn't over, not until every last Sauron force was driven from Tarsa 9. Jules's body was trembling with exhaustion. Every step felt like she was dragging herself through mud. Her muscles were sore, her mind foggy from the deadly virus that still lingered in her system. But the antidote had given her a small spark of strength, and that was all she needed to keep going. The weight of leadership pressed down on her shoulders, but it was a weight she was willing to carry for as long as it took. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Zill asked quietly, his voice filled with concern as they moved forward. Jules didn't look at him. She couldn't afford to show doubt. Not now. We don't have a choice. The Salrans won't stop until they've destroyed everything. We have to take them down. We take the fight to them and we finish this. Dr. Zill nodded, but said nothing more. He had seen the determination in her eyes ever since that first moment they realized they could win. He admired her strength, but even he couldn't ignore the toll this battle had taken on her. The survivors had gathered behind them. A small group of soldiers, engineers, and medics, people who, against all odds, were still standing. There were no more safe places to hide, no more walls to protect them. They had to fight, or they would lose everything. Jules turned to the group, her voice steady but raw. We make our stand here. We'll take their base, break their command center, and end this. We're human, and we don't back down. A low murmur of agreement spread through the group. They didn't have much left to give, but they were ready. Ready to fight for their home, ready to fight for each other. Jules nodded and led them forward, her weapon raised and ready. They were heading for the Salrans' main base, a heavily fortified compound located on the outskirts of the colony. It was a daunting task, but they had to try. It was their only shot at ending the war. The air grew colder as they approached the base. The distant sound of alien footsteps echoed through the streets, the Salran forces moving like shadows, patrolling and waiting. They were close, too close. Jules's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the base's perimeter. She glanced over her shoulder at Dr. Zill, who gave her a grim nod. We're close. If we can disable their communications, it'll give us an edge, but we can't wait much longer. I know, Jules whispered, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The sense of danger was overwhelming, but she couldn't back down. They were fighting for their survival, fighting for the future of the colony. Suddenly, a loud burst of gunfire rang out from the guard tower. The Salran soldiers had spotted them. Move, move, Jules shouted, taking off toward the entrance. She led the charge, her team following close behind. The first wave of Salran soldiers came at them, their sleek, dark bodies moving with terrifying speed. But Jules and her team were ready. They fought with everything they had, guns firing, grenades exploding, and the harsh sounds of combat echoing through the night. The Salrans may have had the advantage in technology and numbers, but the humans had something stronger. They had the will to fight to survive, no matter the odds. Jules took down one Salran soldier, then another, her aim precise. Her body burned with the effort, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The colony depended on her. Dr. Zill was beside her, his medical pack slung over his shoulder, firing when necessary and rushing to the wounded when he could. He was a healer, not a soldier, but he was doing what he had to. They all were. The battle raged on, but slowly, inch by inch, they pushed forward. The Salrans were strong, but they were disorganized. Their leader was dead, their communication lines disrupted, and the humans were beginning to find their rhythm. Every inch of ground they gained felt like a small victory, a sign that they were not finished yet. They reached the entrance to the command center. Jules's hand trembled as she placed her palm against the door's control panel, her mind still sharp despite the fatigue. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the heart of the Salran operations. Inside, the room was alive with activity. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of burnt circuitry filled the space. The Salran soldiers turned, weapons raised, but Jules didn't hesitate. She moved fast, her team behind her. Get to the control panel, she shouted to Dr. Zill. We need to shut them down now. Dr. Zill didn't need to be told twice. He ran toward the panel, his fingers flying over the console as he tried to override the systems. Meanwhile, Jules and the others fought off the remaining Salrans, their bodies pushing past exhaustion. They were so close now. The Salran soldiers fell one by one, their advanced weapons no match for the human will that refused to break. Jules took a deep breath, sweat trickling down her forehead. She could feel her strength waning. Her vision blurred. She couldn't keep going much longer, but she refused to stop. She couldn't. Finally, Dr. Zill's voice rang out, clear and relieved. Got it. Communications are down. They can't call for reinforcements. A roar of triumph swept through the group, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle was still far from over, and they needed to finish what they started. Jules turned to face the group, her voice steady but strained. We've got one chance. We end this now or we lose everything. With a final, fierce push, they stormed the control room, clearing the last of the Salran forces. The command center was theirs. Jules collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, her body finally giving in, but her heart was full. They had done it. They had taken back their colony. Against all odds, humanity had stood tall. They had won, and no one could ever take that away from them.